There is a profound, undeniable, and perhaps irreversible fracture developing in the political landscape of the United States of America today. It is a fracture centered entirely on a fundamental, heartbreaking betrayal of the American working class. For years, the foundational promise made to the voters who delivered this administration to power was one of immediate and lasting economic salvation. The solemn promise was that the forgotten men and women of this country would no longer be forgotten, that the crushing weight of daily expenses would be lifted, and that the cost of living would finally reflect the reality of their hard, unyielding work. Yet, as we examine the current state of the nation, the overwhelming evidence points to a devastating reality. The electorate is suffocating under the weight of persistent inflation, and the very leaders who promise to relieve that pressure are not only ignoring the crisis, but they are actively mocking the people who are suffering. The president insists that the people are not angry with him, claiming instead that they are angry with the Republican Party as a whole. But this deflection completely ignores the reality of the situation. It is a stunning display of political hubris and a complete abdication of executive leadership at a time when the country desperately requires steady, policy driven governance. Before we delve deeper into this exhaustive investigation, and before we examine the specific financial data, the glaring contradictions, and the coordinated political distractions being deployed by this administration to hide their catastrophic failures, I ask that you subscribe to this channel. Independent, uncompromising, and fact driven journalism is the only mechanism we have left to hold the powerful strictly accountable. Please subscribe right now so that we can continue this vital work and continue to bring you the truth without fear or favor. To truly understand the depth of this betrayal, one must listen directly to the voters who placed their unwavering faith in this president. In recent days, the voices of these deeply frustrated citizens have become impossible to ignore, and their testimony is absolutely damning. These are not political opponents. These are the very people who cast their ballots for him, desperately hoping for financial relief. They speak of gas prices that remain stubbornly high, forcing them to severely limit their driving and to cancel long-awaited family vacations. One voter stated plainly that they voted for the president hoping that prices would go down so they could simply afford to survive. This voter explicitly stated that you cannot afford to breathe at this point. Let that chilling sentiment linger in the air for a moment. An American citizen working every single day and trying to survive feels that they literally cannot afford to breathe in this suffocating economy. And what is the official response from the Oval Office? The president has publicly stated that economic affordability is a hoax, claiming it is a fabricated narrative created by his political adversaries. He has openly stated that he does not care about economic reality, presenting an alternate universe where the suffering of his own base is treated as a malicious fiction. While families calculate every single purchase at the grocery store, and while they sacrifice basic necessities just to keep the lights on, financial disclosures reveal a sickening contrast. The president has reportedly earned something in the area of $2 million since returning to office. The voters recognize this glaring hypocrisy. They see a leader who is looking out exclusively for himself, putting money directly into his own pockets, building his immense wealth, and making sure he can take care of what he needs to, because he is permanently set. He does not have to worry about the cost of living, and therefore it simply does not matter to him what happens to the people who trusted him. The sentiment among these betrayed voters is crystal clear, perfectly summarized by the feeling of, brother man, this is not what we voted for. They elected a populist champion, and instead they received a cynical profiteer. This staggering level of detachment requires a look back at our political history to fully comprehend its potential consequences. In the year 1992, President George Herbert Walker Bush visited a grocers convention and appeared genuinely baffled by a standard electronic barcode scanner. The political devastation that followed was absolute and immediate. The American people saw a leader who seemed to be living on another planet, utterly disconnected from the basic, mundane realities of purchasing food for a family. But what we are witnessing today is far more egregious. This is not mere ignorance of modern technology. This is a willful, calculated denial of the economic suffering of the American people, delivered by a leader who explicitly stated just months ago that he loves inflation. That statement alone is a massive gift to the ad makers of the Democratic Party across the entire country. This dangerous alternative reality is not sustained by the president alone. It is carefully constructed and fiercely protected by an entire cabinet of enablers who are equally detached from the desperate struggles of the working class. When we examine the individuals surrounding the president, we find a collection of multimillionaires and billionaires whose daily experiences have absolutely nothing in common with the average citizen. These are people who have not had to check the price of a gallon of milk or worry about the cost of a basic service in decades, if they ever had to worry about it at all. They do not go to a regular place to get a haircut, they have private stylists come to their sprawling estates. The people around a president are often more important than the president himself, because they are supposed to be the individuals who deliver the hard, unvarnished truths about what is actually happening in the country. But when those advisors are fundamentally removed from the actual experience of the American people, the truth never reaches the resolute desk. The result is an administration flying completely blind, guided only by their own immense privilege, and completely insulated from the devastating consequences of their own disastrous policies. We need look no further for undeniable evidence of this dangerous detachment than the recent comments made by the United States Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent. Appearing on a major financial news network, Secretary Bessent addressed the widening gap between the rich and the poor, a phenomenon that economists often refer to as a K-shaped recovery, where the wealthy soar upwards while the working class plummets toward disaster. Secretary Besant arrogantly declared that he was sick of hearing about this K-shaped economy, dismissing the very real, thoroughly documented economic divide as if it were merely a tedious talking point that annoyed him. He flippantly stated that it is pretty simple: the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. For the United States Secretary of the Treasury to outright dismiss the documented suffering of millions of citizens with such callous disregard reveals a culture of contempt at the highest levels of the United States government. They are not merely failing to solve the problem, they are actively angry that the public dares to complain about their suffering. This investigation is exposing the deliberate, cynical strategies used by those in power to manipulate the public and avoid taking any real responsibility for their spectacular failures. To ensure you never miss these deep dives into the stories that matter most, and to support our mission of demanding absolute accountability, please subscribe to our channel right now. Your subscription empowers us to keep digging far beyond the superficial headlines and bring you the hard, unvarnished truth every single time. The consequences of this blatant systemic disregard for the working class are finally beginning to materialize in the political data, and the numbers are absolutely devastating for the administration. For a highly significant period, the Republican Party maintained a massive structural advantage when voters were asked which party had a better approach to managing the United States economy. That advantage was the absolute cornerstone of their political strategy. However, recent highly credible polling indicates a monumental and potentially historic shift. For the first time in an extended period, the Democratic Party has officially overtaken the Republican Party on the vital issue of the economy, currently leading 37% to 36%. Furthermore, 27% of the electorate now explicitly states that they do not trust either political party to handle their financial futures. This data is a direct, undeniable indictment of the current administration. It is a mathematical reflection of the voters finally realizing that the endless promises of economic populism were entirely hollow. The electorate is realizing that they were used, that their genuine economic anxieties were weaponized merely to secure political power, and that once that power was attained, their very real concerns were immediately discarded and branded as a hoax. Faced with this mounting electoral disaster, one would logically expect the legislative branch to intervene on behalf of the American people. One would expect members of Congress, particularly those within the president's own party, to introduce comprehensive economic packages to aggressively fight back against the inflationary tariffs that act as a massive tax on consumers, or to offer genuine substantive policy solutions to alleviate the crushing cost of living. Instead, we see total, humiliating paralysis born of absolute political cowardice. The conventional wisdom strongly suggests that lawmakers should make the upcoming election a direct referendum on the economy, but they refuse to do so. Why do they refuse? Because the entire political apparatus is paralyzed by an environment of fear, corruption, and pure retribution that the president has systematically created. The political incentives for these lawmakers simply do not align with serving the American people. Their only incentive is to protect themselves from the wrath of the president. They know that speaking the truth about the devastating economy will instantly make them targets of his anger, and so they consciously choose their own political survival over the economic survival of their own constituents. They point to the Russia sanctions bill as if it is a major victory, patting themselves on the back and saying congratulations, while completely ignoring the domestic financial rot destroying the middle class. While they cannot undo complex foreign crises like the war in Iran, they absolutely have the power to address tariffs and domestic economic policy, yet they do absolutely nothing. The political and media apparatus surrounding them is effectively short circuiting, completely unable to process the reality of their failure, acting as if they missed their morning matcha and cannot function, so they desperately pivot to the past to find a convenient scapegoat. Because they completely refuse to govern, and because they have absolutely zero economic solutions to offer the public, they must resort to the only tactic they have left in their arsenal: manufacturing fake outrage and resurfacing old boogeymen to aggressively distract a furious base. This is the precise reason why they have suddenly decided to resurrect the specter of Dr. Anthony Fauci. It is an incredibly transparent and deeply cynical strategy to transport voters back to the intense trauma of the pandemic era and deliberately redirect their current economic pain toward a highly familiar, highly vilified target. We are now seeing prominent lawmakers, such as Senator Rand Paul, publicly demanding that Dr. Anthony Fauci be directly referred to the Department of Justice for criminal prosecution, actively attempting to circumvent a full Democratic vote in the United States Senate. Whether the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia will even remotely entertain such a blatantly political and factually hollow referral remains highly doubtful, but the actual legal outcome is completely irrelevant to these politicians. The ultimate goal is not justice. The ultimate goal is absolute distraction. The goal is to give their base someone to hate so intensely that they somehow forget that they cannot afford to buy basic groceries for their families. This relentless, exhausting pivot to manufactured controversy exposes a profound and deeply disturbing truth about the modern iteration of this political movement. For over a decade now, the party has entirely ceased to be an organization defined by policy, competent governance, or the concrete advancement of the American condition. It has completely devolved into a singular entity dedicated entirely to the protection, the pleasing, and the personal enrichment of one man. When a political party completely abandons its legislative platform, it has absolutely nothing left to give the American people but shiny objects and performative, theatrical rage. Historically, they have relied heavily on anger to keep their fractured coalition together. They relentlessly weaponized anger against former President Barack Obama. They continuously weaponized anger against President Joe Biden. They relentlessly weaponized anger against former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and now they are desperately pulling her back into the narrative. And now they are weaponizing anger against Dr. Anthony Fauci. It is an endless, exhausting, deeply destructive cycle of grievance designed specifically to ensure that the American people never realize that the people they elected are completely and utterly incapable of actually leading the country or fixing the economy. The ultimate victims of this massive, coordinated political fraud are the very citizens who genuinely believed the promises. The working class voters who are desperately skipping meals, canceling family vacations, and completely draining their life savings accounts are the ones paying the ultimate price for this spectacular failure of national leadership. The president presents an alternate reality where the economy is supposedly perfect and any suggestion to the contrary is a malicious conspiracy against him. His millionaire cabinet members roll their eyes at the immense suffering of the working class, completely isolated in their lavish cocoons of extreme wealth. And the cowardly lawmakers in the United States Congress cower in absolute fear, consciously choosing to attempt to prosecute a retired doctor rather than pass a single piece of meaningful legislation that might actually bring down the astronomical cost of living. This is not just a standard failure of public policy, it is a profound historic moral failure. It is the tragic story of a government that has completely turned its back on the very people it was elected to serve, demanding absolute, unquestioning loyalty while offering absolutely nothing in return. The American people deserve competent leadership, and right now they are receiving nothing but contempt. Thank you for joining me for this comprehensive, unwavering investigation into the deliberate abandonment of the American working class and the corruption of our political institutions. If you value relentless, uncompromising journalism that absolutely refuses to accept the official narrative and holds those in power strictly accountable for their failures, please subscribe to our channel before you leave. We will continue to aggressively track this story and expose the truth no matter where it leads.